Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our series of shirim in the Mitteler Rebbe Shaar HaYichud with the commentary of Rav Hillel Paracher, Schus Yogan Aleinu. And we're continuing where we left off with Os Gimel. Now, we discussed last week ultimately how all of the processes of contemplation, from the loftiest level of the contemplation on the level of Keser, and then most predominantly in the realm of Chachma, and then uncovering the potential of Bina within Chachma that extends itself downwards to become the Chachma of Bina, revealing the inherent connection between these three stages of contemplation, Keser, Chachma, and Bina. We came to a place where the Mitteler Rebbe is bringing us to the awareness that the fundamental goal is to bring it down into the midos, to bring it down, that the contemplation should have an impact, that the contemplation should traverse the boundary between the mind and the body, between the seichel and the midos, and that takes place through Yisrael, Saba, and Tfuna. So we discussed ultimately that there's Bina, which is the place of Ha'amaka, which is the place of Iyun, which is the place of contemplation, which brings us into Chachma itself. And then from Chachma, we have the ability of accessing Das Elyon. All of that is only valuable when we understand that Bina needs a Tavuna. Tavuna, which is the Malchus of Bina, which is the interface between the Moichin of Bina, those pure states of contemplation and their transcendental ideal, and allowing it to be translated into the emotional register where the lowest expression of Bina, which is the Mutva within the Muskal, the habituated state of thinking, which is the lowest level of Bina, that Malchus of Bina, which is Tvuna, that becomes the Moichin of Zer Anpin. That becomes the Netzachot and the Yesod of Bina, which express themselves downwards to become the Chachma, Bina, and Das of Zer Anpin, which means that that's the point of transformation where the ideals become expressed in a real way. And we said that that's the role of Tvuna. Tvuna is what allows the Moichin to be transplanted into the midos themselves. But theoretically, one could look at what the Mitteler Rebbe is doing and say, okay, the Mitteler Rebbe is just giving us an example. He's just utilizing the example of Bina to represent the full gamut of what it means to contemplate, to access something by way of its orech, to extend the idea downwards by way of metaphors and the element of the Bina of it, and then to open it up berochev, which is the chachma of it, and then to come upon the depth of the matter, the innermost point, the amkus hadavar, which is the secret of das, which reveals the keser. But perhaps one could have thought that it's not necessary that the Mitteler Rebbe is using the example of Bina to teach us something specific, and that's what the Mitteler Rebbe is going to come and teach us here, that no, it's specifically Bina, it's specifically the lowest level of contemplation, the attempt to contemplate things by way of Mimale Kol Alman, the lower level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity, where contemplation begins. Because, as we're going to see, there's two states of consciousness. There's two states of speculative contemplation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in the world, in our lives, and in existence. One is referred to as the Yichud Ilah, and one is referred to as the Yichud Tata. Chachma and Bina can be identified as the Yichud Ilah and the Yichud Tata. From the perspective of Chachma, in the world of Atzilus, everything is nullified in the grand unity of the world of Chachma. And that is the question of how we see things from the divine perspective of unity and how it's possible that proliferation of details can emerge from it. That's the Yichud Ilah, seeing the grand unity of all things. That's the Soivev Kol Alman, seeing how HaKadosh Baruch Hu transcends and breaks beyond any of the confines of this worldly measurement or boundary. And in truth, the truest way to look at anything is the unbound unity of it all, negating in its root the existence of anything else. But then there's the level of Yichud Tata, which is the Memale Kalam, and that no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills all worlds, meaning to say that there is a world and HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills it. It's not just him surrounding it and negating the existence of the world by way of the Yichud Ilah, the ascendant unity of Chachma, but rather it's the lower level of immanence where HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows his infinite light to garb itself within finite creation, and it's our job to behold the infinite light that rests within finite creation itself, which is the secret of the Yichud Tata, which is the secret of Mamalik Alamin, which is the secret of Bina. And we would have thought that really the main thing is going to be the Yichud Ilah, the secret of Chachma, the secret of contemplation by way of the transcendental ideals, where we don't get stuck within the demarcations of this worldly restriction. So why is it that the Mitteler Rebbe is bringing the first example of contemplation specifically by way of Bina, which is Memala Kalaman? This is where we're going to pick up on what the Mitteler Rebbe is going to continue to explain to us, is that, yes, you're right, the ideal of Yichud Ilah is higher, but nevertheless, in the territory of Yichud Tata, that's where the intensification of the unity comes out. That's where the pungent odor, the tzike kedera of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus would come out, specifically in the place of the resistance that forces the unity to extend itself with all of its ferocity. It's that place that the greatest level of contemplation is going to take place, which is what's going to open the Mitteler Rebbe up onto the most important conversation as we prepare ourselves for the Seder Shtalshalos, which is how should we contemplate? Do we contemplate by way of the whole of Chachma, or do we contemplate by way of the part, by way of Bina? And ultimately, what the Mitteler Rebbe is going to teach us is what we've been saying in all of our shirim, is that we go from the whole of Chachma into the particularity of Bina, only so that the particularity of Bina can serve as an index to allow us to return back to the whole of Chachma with a newfound insight, because now the whole of Chachma does not stand in stark opposition to the partiality and the part nature of Bina, but rather the part nature of Bina is included and maintained within the unity of Chachma, thereby revealing the level of Keser. But what we see here in this parak is that the Mitteler Rebbe is going to have us understand the depth of contemplation and the purpose of contemplation, specifically from the perspective of Bina, specifically from the perspective of Mamala Kalam, and from the lower level of unity, because that's where the illumination is truly going to come from. And this comes back to really the derech klal. What the Mitteler Rebbe is doing is it's giving us a language of Bina. It's giving us a language of the particularity so that we can increase the level of unity by way of including particularity within itself. And a lot of what we're going to be saying now is going to be rooted in Rav Hillel of Parich's commentary on Os Gimel in the Shaar HaBiurim. But we're not going to go through all of those, but we're going to see that it becomes a very fundamental focal point in terms of understanding the differentiation of metaphors. The Heilige Mitteler Rebbe, and we'll try and go slow, Be'ezras Hashem. The whole zeh, meaning once we've identified the need for tivuna, which is the malchus of bina, to allow the light of bina to extend itself downwards into the realm of the midos, into zer anpin, we understand the nature of hisboinenus v'hasagas elikus. We come to understand the fact that it's by way of the contemplation of the bina mind that enables us to grasp godliness. Sheyesh beis madregos. There's two levels. There's bina and there's tivuna. There's the transcendental ideal of Bina, which still rests within the space of Moichin and pure contemplation. And then there's the realistic path of Bina, which is Tavuna, which allows those ideals to transform themselves into lived experience. Bina, what does Bina mean? Hainu b'chinas etzem hahasaga ha'elikus b'chol prat inyan shemisboinen eichu umahu v'oimed al hadavar bi'iyun rav b'chol pratei chelka v'chulei kenizker la'el. The nature of Bina is still within the realm of pure contemplation. It is the essence of the contemplated thing itself. It is the act of contemplation itself, which is the contemplation of divine ideals, which demands of us to descend down into each and every particular in accordance with what it is and how it is and where it stands, and to come by way of a deep contemplation to the depth of the matter in accordance with all of the particularity of its parts, as we discussed above. Just like Kemo Bahasagas Protius de Memala Kalalman Shuhu Hisavus Yesh Me Ayin Hanikra Koyach Hapoyel Ha'eloki Benipal, Buhu Bechina Shem Adnes Oishem Elokim Lashon Koach Kiadua. Hine Yesh Baze Kame Chaluke Protium Baifanum Chitzonius Ha'inyan Ad Asher Yusag Toch Tocha Inyan Hazeh Hapnimius Ha'atzmi Ech Shuhu Be'etzem Chule. Shezehu Hanikra Oimek HaMusag. So the Mitteler Rebbe is describing the nature of Bina. What does it mean to be in a Bina mind? So let's say, for example, and now we know that this example is not just happenstance, but this example is very deliberate to teach us the elevated status of Mamala Kalaman, which is theoretically a lower level, but to show that it's by way of the particular that will come to index the realization of the full potency of the whole. So the example of Bina is that when a person is trying to grasp the particularities of what it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mamala Kalaman, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created a world and he fills that world. He created existence and he fills all of existence, which is synonymous with the notion of the emergence of something from nothingness. Somethingness is the world of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. It's this worldliness. And nothingness is the world of Atzilus. When it comes to Mamala Kalaman, we're understanding the emergence of somethingness from nothingness itself. That's the way that we contemplate Hashem's presence within separation. This is also referred to as koyach hapoyel ha'eloki benipal. It's referred to as grasping the active participation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's vitality within the vitalization of all things, which is referred to as the Shem of Adnus. This is the place in which we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu express himself down here, or in the Shem Elokim, which is the language of strength and all of the proliferation of strengths as it's known. And there's so many different particulars that can be understood in accordance with this particular grasp, both in their chitzonius and in their pinimius, to the point that a person comes to the depth of the matter, which is the idea itself. So we see that even when we're looking at a particular example of what we're being mispoining on, let's take the nature of Malak al-Almin. So the Mitteler Rebbe, just by way of trying to show the nature of contemplation, which is understanding new metaphors for things, so he says, okay, so we have Malak al-Almin, which is also Yesh Me'ayin, which is also Koyach HaPayal HaEliki in the Koyach of the Nipal, which is also the Shem of Adnas or Elikim, which is also the element of the Chitzonius of Devarim. So we see that to come upon the Nakuda of an idea by way of Bina means to extend it by way of its vertical metaphors in the derech of Oirech, as well as the horizontal metaphors in the derech of Reichev. This is all an example of what Bina means. And this is still prior to Tvuna, this depth of contemplation, which brings me to the Oimek HaMusag. Right, it's the oirech of bina, which is the metaphoricity from above to below, the rochev of bina, the metaphoricity extending itself outwards, and that leads me ultimately to the innermost nakuda, which is the pnimius hadas. All of that is just what we refer to as iyun. That's just the kli that allows me to come upon the depth of the matter. So this is still just all examples of the Mitteler Rebbe explaining the myriad details in which one particular itemized point on the Seder Shtalshalis can be contemplated by way of the purity of Bina, as well as understanding the Oirech. What is the Oirech of something? And again, the Mitteler Rebbe is just giving us examples. The Oirech is the extension of the innermost point of an idea by way of vertical metaphors, taking the idea and applying it into the vessels of metaphors that can go down one level to the next to the degree that it could be explained to even the simplest person. It's very different than the roichev of the metaphors. When I'm applying metaphors so that it can descend downwards, each and every metaphor is conveying exactly what the nakuda of the idea is. I'm not learning anything new by way of this attempt at metaphorization, of drawing it down from one level to the next. I'm just extending the reach in which this idea can be expressed. The roichev of the metaphor, however, the extension of the metaphor by way of the chachma of that which I'm contemplating, is where I'm coming to understand what each and every metaphor is teaching me about the singular idea. The idea is singular, and each and every metaphor that needs to be used is going to be a singularly unique expression of the thing, and one would not have been enough. When it comes to the orech, when it comes to the vertical expression, so one metaphor is enough. The rochev is the extension and the proliferation of metaphors, because each and every metaphor is teaching me something new about something. All of this is still contained within Bina. When I'm contemplating something by way of Bina, so let's say the Mamala Kalaman, so the oirich of that contemplation is going to be figuring out how I can find the metaphor that allows the notion of Mamala Kalaman to go down a level so that even a child could understand it. But the rochev of the metaphor, the chachma of that aspect of Bina, is going to be the extensions of metaphors by way of horizontal extension, which is me learning more about the innermost nakuda by way of understanding what each and every metaphor is going to convey. So, for example, Rebbe Paracher explains, just for example, the difference of metaphors that are going to be understood on the level of oirech and understood on the level of roichev. So let's say I'm contemplating Mamala Kalam in the presence of godliness in creation itself by way of oirech. That means it's the bina of bina. So that is going to be understanding the way in which things extend from the etzem of something to the hispashtus of something. There's the original light, and there's the extension of that light downwards. And there's going to be four categories of metaphors over here. There's going to be the shine of the sun that's contained within the sun, the ziv hashemesh min hashemesh. There's going to be the light of the candle that shines within the house. There's going to be the sense of the soul within the body itself. And there's going to be the power and the vitality of divine vitality within all things. All four of those categories are metaphoric categories that can be used to understand how things can extend downwards. And then there's the roichev of the metaphors, which are no longer a question of etzem and hispashtus, of the idea itself and the application of that idea, but rather it's going to be a far more gentle and unified perspective of metaphoricity, which is he'elem v'giloi. So there's going to be metaphors that imply the relationship between the point of origin and the extension from that point of origin, but the point of origin remains above above and the extension comes below. That's the oirech, that's the etzem and the hispashtus, and the four categories of mashal that we gave there. And then there's the rochev, which is the chachma of the metaphors, which is he'elem and giloi. We're no longer dealing with the essential point that expresses itself downwards, where the downward expression is separate and apart from the essential point. Now we're dealing with a far more delicate form of metaphor, which is the metaphors for revelation and concealment. Revelation and concealment are very different than the etzem, the essence, and the extension of the essence. When I have an essence and the extension of the essence, yes, it contains the irreducible light of the essence, but it's not identifiable with the essence itself. When it comes to he'elem and giloi, on the other hand, nothing changes. Each thing is exactly what it is. The only thing that is shifting is the revelation or the concealment of it. So these two forms of metaphors, they break up into 7 different categories, 8 different categories of metaphors that a person is going to see proliferating and populating all of the svarim of Hasidus and Kabbalah. All of this is very delicate and specific in its nature because this is the modality in which we come to understand Bina. So just like we said before, the 4 categories of metaphor in terms of etzem and hispashtus, which is the oirech, the linearity and the verticality of taking an idea and applying it downwards. So we have the sun and the shine of the sun. We have the light of the nair that emerges from the candle. We have the extension of the soul within the body itself and the extension of divine vitality within existence itself. But then when it comes to the second level and the second category of metaphors, so we have a different thing. He'elem v'giloi, that means the vitality of the body by way of the soul itself, the ability of the eye to see, which is going to be revelation and concealment versus essence and expression. There's the light of the intellect in the process of intellectualization. There's the spark that emerges from within the flint stone, and there's the revelation of the concealment of thought within Dibor itself. We now see 9 different types of metaphors that all represent different things, all represent different ways of contemplating something. A person can know something and they can say the names of the metaphors, but unless a person is deeply contemplating the extension of this idea across the boundary of these vertical and horizontal metaphors, they have not yet come to the place of full Bina. And all of this is still just within Bina itself. All of this is still just within Bina itself. So now the Mitteler Rebbe is going to explain all of the myriad metaphors that can be explained. All of this is just to explain to us the nature of Bina itself. Shaar hu b'chinas klila vola b'chinas ha'omek v'chulei. That iyun, bina, is the vessel in which we open ourselves up to come to the depth of the matter. And the bechina of the oirech, the extension of those metaphors downward by way of verticality, which is the bina of bina, that's the element of hiskarvus ha'inyan hazeh el hasechel b'mishalim shoinim hayeduim ad sheyeh hadavar hazeh karov b'moichai ma'od b'levush hagshama ad sheyachol tinok lahasig. So when it comes to the oirech of bina, so that means applying metaphors that bring it closer to lower levels of understanding and to allow it to congeal itself in accordance to human logic to the point that even a child can grasp it. That's the oirech of bina. And the roichev of bina, but the extension by way of the horizontal growth, which is metaphoricity for the sake of understanding the true idea in a deeper way, what that means is the harchiv zehadavar, to take this essential point, not to translate it down below, but to extend it, to come to know it better, to understand it in all of its different applications, not in just one way, levad, it's not enough for me to understand it by way of one metaphor, by way of the metaphor of the soul and the spirit expressing itself within the body. Because that's only one way of understanding the matter, which is the description of hispashtus from the etzem, that there's the essence and there's the extension of the essence. But there's so many different metaphors that can describe the emergence of an expression from within the essence itself. And as well as the different category of metaphors, which is Gilui and Ha'elim, which is a far different way of relationship between the thing and its expression. Whether we're going to use the movement of the body from within the potency of the body's capacity to move itself, or the osios that are written within the soul prior to actualization, all of these different categories of metaphors, they're not there just to extend it downwards. They're there to allow me to open the idea up horizontally so that I can come to a deeper idea. So we see that there's so many different types of categorization of the metaphors in which we're going to try and understand the relationship with the infinite and the finite. These types of metaphors, when it comes to the roichev of the bina, not just the oirech of the bina, not just the bina of the bina, but the chachma of the bina, and again, all of this is still prior to to tfuna. All of this is still in the depth of contemplation, which is the process of coming to terms with finding HaKadosh Baruch Hu within my own mind and transforming my hispainus into a hispaidus, where with the oisius of the machshava, I have the ability to dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu at each stage of the Seder Shtalshalos and to realize Malchuscha, Malchus Kol Alamim. But nevertheless, as the Mitteler Rebbe is showing us in this example, Ein L'Davar Sof, there's such an extension of ways of thinking about one singular idea. There's the extension of the metaphors, which are Etzem and Hispashtus, and there's the metaphors of He'elem and Giloi, two very radical separate ways of revelation. All of these are just the extension of my ability to stand upon the singular point of the idea, which is the hisravchus ha'anyanim. What's the opposite of this bina? Ha'hipach mizehu ha'kitzer rav ba'ofen echad v'gam hu b'derech tzera niskar b'moiche bilti espashtus laharchiv b'klal. When a person doesn't encounter the extension of the metaphors, when a person doesn't go into the depth of bina, so it's the opposite. All they have is an understanding of it by derech kitzer, which is the tamsitz ha'inyan, which is just like delivering the end result without understanding the burgeoning possibilities that are at play within it to make the contemplation all the more joyful and revealing the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically by way of concealment and the particularity. If a person only takes the kitzer, then they can only explain it in one way, and it's still just a derech kitzera, and they're just extending an overview of it in their mind without any extension or widening whatsoever. That's without bina. Aval kamoy shezeh hadavar nitfas la'oimka be'etzem echar kol riboy hesber dimyon hamashalim hu nikra oimek v'tamsis zeh hamusag kinizka la'el. But as we understand, the depth of bina is not leaving the innermost point, but it's the extension of the innermost point by way of the imagination of all of the metaphors, which ultimately brings me to the oimek and the tamsitz, which is the pnimius of bina itself. And I shouldn't be immature and think that I should just take the simple idea in its quintessential form without descending down into the myriad particulars of it that extend it beyond itself, because that's an immature grasp. The grasp of the tamsitz, the quintessential grasp, to the degree that I could stand upon it in one singular point, and kol Torah kulu inyan achas, and to diminish it into a singular point, that's only after all of the ribui of the oirich and the roichev and the hishtalshalis of the thinking and the sha'ashuin of the thinking itself. That's the value of bina. Dahainu acher haslabshas chitzon yuso b'chol ha'iyun harav. It's only after I draw this idea down into all of the extended forms of thinking. V'dai lamevin. This is the element of bina. Ukamosha kasav lamala b'chol prate keser chochma bina de bina hakol yimsa b'hasaga pratius kazois v'chiagavna b'chol hasaga salikus hapratium kamosha yispar lekaman. So what the Mitteler Rebbe is saying here is that everything we just described, which is just analyzing one particular vantage point of choosing to contemplate memala kalam in the lower level of unity, which is ultimately the deepest place of contemplation, even though that's counterintuitive, because ideally we should contemplate that which is above. But Zak the Mitteler Rebbe, no, it's specifically by way of the pratim. So this keser chachma of bina, which is the oirich, the roichev, and the oimek of bina of bina is the oirich, the metaphors that go downwards to explain it to a child. The chachma of bina is the roichev, which is the extension of the metaphors to help me better understand the concept. And the keser of bina is the oimek hamusag, which is drawing down the idea fully into that place of bina. And that's the element of das, which is the element of hakara, of understanding it in its depth. And that's the hargasha, the muskal, behiskashrus, keniskar la'el. And that's the depth of connection that I have to that idea. The alzene marve adatem, da'as alekei avicha, shu b'hasaga zu de mamala kalam and dafka kiyadua. And it's specifically this nature of mamala kalam that a person has to come to understand. They have to bring it down. Dafka hamevi the bechinas umka de kula, dahainu le bechinas oimek de chachma shemei ein timsa. And it's specifically by way of the contemplation of mamala kalaman, of the bina itself, of separation, that I'll come afterwards to understand the klal kulo of chachma, which emerges from nothingness. Dainu bechinas oimek re'ius haseichel b'hasaga zu sheba bechinas mamala kalaman shalamala me hasaga haseichel hiyadua. It's only by way of going through the bina, the chachma, and the keser of bina, through that way of mamala kalaman, that I'll come to uncover the hidden latch that connects the mamala kalaman, the yichud ilah, the yichud tata, to the source of it, which is the yichud ilah. Kamosha kosev b'raya mehemna, as the Zohar Kadosh says, ba'ayin haseichel de beliba et chazik kula v'nikra le'istakla b'yikra v'gam b'zeh yesh b'chinas oimek k'niskal el ba'arichos. And now, once a person goes from the contemplation of mamala kalaman through the bina, the chachma, and the keser of the bina, they come to the oimek of the bina, which is the havin b'chachma, and it ascends upwards to the vision of chachma, which is the istakla b'yikra, the malka. That's the secret of chachma itself, but that is also split up into all of these categories of the oimek, the roichev, and the roichev. That's all bina. That's still not yet translated down across the boundaries. Ubechinas hatvuna, but when it comes to tvuna, when it comes to the actual ability through the malchus of bina to allow this to extend downwards into the realm of zah, hainu ledalus ayedei meoimek zeh hane'elam b'musag zeh dememala kalalman hanizka la'el. What it means to have tvuna is to be able to dig down deep and reach down into the depths of this musag that we just grasped of mamala kalalman through the lens of bina liyadei gilui, to bring it into actualization, to bring it into revelation, to come to be aware of all of these things in a lived and felt way. Because when a person is properly received and properly sat and properly allowed this idea to enter into themselves by way of this type of contemplation, im kain yachol lahavia bekama inyanim nivdalim mimenu kamay bekama pratim mitzias ailamis anavrayim eich shemishavim ein liyesh b'mechinas mamala b'derech prat asher ne'elem b'klodus ha'asagazu. Once I have tvuna, I'm now able to take this tamsat ha'inyan and apply it across the board in all of the myriad situations in which I find myself, in all of the particularities of existence, in all of the worlds, and all of the creatures of existence. I can contemplate how each and every one of them are ultimately still in that same process of the emergence of something from nothing, which is the expression of the Mamalik al-Alman, which we just contemplated by way of its particularity, which is all contained and hidden within this original contemplation. That's what Tfuna does. It takes the kernel of contemplation of Bina and it allows it to descend down and express itself in the myriad applications in our lives, to the degree that every single moment in a person's life is another sugya that they can be mispoining on, and then to come to the place of Soimav Kalaman, and then to come to the place of Miba Adecha Ein Shem Metzias Klal, and that there's no point along the Seder Shtalshalis that a person can't tap into and receive all that there is to receive. And then to come to the next point as if it's a brand new world. But ubilti koyach hatvuna hazois b'hasagazu de b'malik alman. But without the tvuna, without the ability to translate this in accordance with the different circumstances that I live in and the lived experience of my life, if I don't have the tvuna that takes this contemplated notion of mamalik alman, of finding Hashem in concealment, hare nisheres hasagazu rak b'moyach havanasa levad. Velo yeda mala asoispa. Be'ech lahavi zoisa espainunus be'echus inyan hesavas hayesh me'ein klal kamuvan mikola nal v'dailamevin. But if I don't have that tvuna, then this entire process of contemplation remains stuck within the bina of my own mind, and I'm not going to know how to actually apply it and do the work of contemplating and looking at that which I see in the quality of my day-to-day experience and how everything is emergent from the infinite light of nothingness and how all somethingness is emergent from there, and I'll have no ability to understand it. ומזה מובן סיבס המניע בחדשים או גם בישנים בחסרי תבונה, גם שמשיגים היטב הדק בשעה ששומעים ורואים, לא יוכלו להביא הדבר כלל בהספינוס בתפילה בעניין הסבס האילמוס, עד שישון מה לעשות בכל זה, ולאלה תיילס צריכים לזה. כי בייס דברים נבדלים הם לדייסם, מפני שנשאר רק בבחינס ההבנה עצמה במויכי, נבדל לגמרי מכל עניין כנזכה לאל, ודי למבין. I want to do a clear translation of this because it's so beautiful. As a result of understanding the importance of having tfuna, which is the application of all that has just been contemplated in the realm of Bina, and the value of contemplating the particularities to extend upwards into the whole, Mizeh Muvan will understand the reason that there has always been, now and back then, a deficiency, something that prevents certain people who lack tfuna, where it prevents them from grasping properly the depth of what they heard. They can properly understand what they hear when they're hearing it, or what they see when they're reading it, but when it comes to the actuality of the matter, they don't have the ability to bring the thing into actualization. They don't know how to be mispoining on it during davening. They don't know how to see it within their day-to-day lives, to the degree that they have to ask, what's the purpose of all of this? Why do I have to know all of these particular details? And the reason is because there's two completely separate, they see that these things as two completely separate things. They see Bina as just contemplation and then the actions themselves. But the secret of Tfuna is the unity between contemplation and action. It's the oisius of the machshava. It's what draws the hidden language of hisbaininus into the avoida. That's why a person needs tfuna, because only then is there going to be a tawelis l'devarim. Only then is a person going to have the ability to properly understand it. And we're going to continue Be'ezer Hashem next week with furthering the notion that the Mitteler Rebbe is teaching us, that it is specifically by way of the contemplation of the particulars, specifically by way of mamala kalaman, specifically by way of the encounter intuitive descent into the lower levels of unity that we're going to come to contemplate the particulars and come upon the grandeur and the infinite capacity and possibility of the klal kulo. And then when we have the proper balance of the klal and the prat of chachma and bina, we're going to be able to uncover the light of keser within each and every nekuda, each and every nodal point upon the path of Ishtal Shalas Be'ezras Hashem.